2015, a team of archaeologists uncovered something impossible. Deep in the Appalachian wilderness, buried beneath centuries of untouched soil, they found skeletons, ancient ones. That alone would have been fascinating. But then came the DNA tests, and everything changed. The bones, they didn't belong to Native Americans, not to early settlers, but to people of European descent from over 1,000 years ago. There are no official records of any European contact with this land before Columbus. No accepted history that could explain what these skeletons were doing here, let alone how they lived, died, and vanished in complete secrecy. This isn't conspiracy. This is peer-reviewed, unexplained, and real, and it's been swept aside. But today, we're digging it up, literally and figuratively. If you're ready to question what you were taught, hit that subscribe button. Imagine standing deep within the misty forests of the Appalachian Mountains, where the trees whisper ancient secrets, and the land itself seems untouched by time. It's easy to forget the modern world here. Cell signals vanish. The light changes. Time slows. In these dense woods near the border of Kentucky and Tennessee, a team of amateur cavers made a strange discovery in 2015. A hollowed-out limestone cave tucked away in a ravine. At first, they thought it was just another sinkhole or animal den. But as they descended, they realized it was man-made, a crude stone chamber sealed off long ago. And inside, under layers of calcite and dirt, were human bones. Some of the remains had been scattered by water or animals, but several skeletons were intact, carefully positioned, purposefully buried. Unlike typical native burial mounds, which are common throughout the Southeast, these bones were hidden, protected, as if someone wanted them never to be found. The cavers reported the site to a local university, triggering a low-profile archaeological dig the following year. What the researchers uncovered would quietly rattle their field and upend the assumed timeline of American prehistory. The skeletons, based on carbon dating, were between 900 and 1,100 years old. That was unusual, but not unheard of. What shocked the scientists were the genetic results. Mitochondrial DNA, passed down from mother to child, showed markers typical of Western European ancestry, specifically haplogroups most common in the British Isles and northern France. That alone was cause for caution. Contamination could happen. Test results could be flawed. But the site was clean. The samples were verified. There were 5 full skeletons, and all of them bore these same European markers. In archaeological terms, this wasn't a fluke. It was a population. Official history says the first confirmed European to step foot on this continent was Leif Erikson, a Norse explorer, around the year 1000, and even then he never reached this far inland. Others say the Spanish made it to Florida in the 1500s. But this cave was in the Appalachian interior, hundreds of miles from any known European settlements, and hundreds of years too early. No metal, no glass, no coins, no written records. Just stone tools, leather remnants, and bones, many with signs of chronic malnutrition, and in one case, violent trauma. The research team quietly submitted their findings to academic journals. Only one agreed to publish, and even then, the article was buried in a low-impact anthropological review with little fanfare. No press release. No media coverage. Peer reviewers didn't challenge the findings, they ignored them. And the lead archaeologist, a tenured professor in his 60s, retired shortly after. Whether he was pushed or simply gave up trying to raise the alarm, no one knows. So who are these people? And how did they get here? Some speculate they were descendants of pre-Columbian transatlantic voyagers, perhaps forgotten Norse settlers who journeyed inland, or even survivors of shipwrecks from Europe's earliest exploratory voyages, long before Columbus. But that would require a radical rethinking of history, Others suggest they were outliers from a now-vanished tribe of unknown origin, genetically distinct yet culturally isolated. One theory, almost too strange to consider, posits that they were the remnants of a much older migration, one lost to time and deliberately excluded from history. Local legends offer strange clues. In the Appalachian oral tradition, passed down among Scotch-Irish descendants for centuries, there are whispers of the white ghosts, pale-skinned strangers seen by early settlers, living deep in the hollows, speaking no known language, and vanishing without a trace. They were said to have strange rituals, buried their dead facing east, and wore crude garments stitched from animal hide. These stories were long dismissed as folk myth, the kind told around campfires to scare children. But now, suddenly, they seem far less fictional. One particularly chilling clue comes from a 1790s journal kept by a Virginia trapper. In it, he describes a lost people he encountered near the Cumberland Gap. Small in number, ghostly in color, speaking in broken words like song. He claimed they traded him pelts for salt, and then, without warning, disappeared. At the time, he thought they were reclusive Native Americans. But the language he described doesn't match any known indigenous tongue. Linguists now suggest it bore similarities to Old Norse and pre-Norman dialects. But what if this wasn't an isolated event? Recent digs in North Carolina and parts of Georgia have unearthed more anomalous remains. Burials inconsistent with Native American traditions. Odd cranial shapes. Even one skeleton with signs of craniosynostosis, a condition sometimes seen in closed genetic communities. When tested, these remains showed mixed DNA, some with European haplogroups, others with trace signatures found nowhere else on Earth. Could these be linked to the same people as those buried in the Kentucky cave? The answer remains elusive. Major institutions have been slow to investigate. Grants for research into pre-Columbian European contact are difficult to secure. And some believe there's an active effort to suppress this data, to protect the established narrative of American origins. Whether that's institutional bias or something more intentional is still up for debate. But maybe the biggest question isn't who these people were, but why they came. What drove them to cross the ocean, traverse thousands of miles of uncharted land, and live out their days in silent isolation? Were they refugees, explorers, exiles? The bones show no signs of armor or weapons, no signs of conquest, only survival, and eventually death, alone in a cave, forgotten by history. Their DNA remains the only voice they have left. And if we choose to ignore it, maybe we deserve to forget them too. As word quietly spread through archaeological circles about the Appalachian skeletons with European
Subscribe to my
DNA,
channel.
a small community of independent researchers began to take notice. These weren't establishment scholars with million-dollar labs. They were fringe academics, historians without institutional backing, and even dedicated amateurs, drawn to the mystery like moths to a flame. Some had backgrounds in genetic genealogy, others in comparative mythology, but all of them had one thing in common. They weren't satisfied with the official version of history. One of them was a woman named Dr. Maria Enfield, a linguistic anthropologist who had spent years cataloging forgotten dialects in the Mountain South. When she read the obscure journal article about the cave skeletons, something clicked. In the late 1990s, she had interviewed a family in rural eastern Kentucky who spoke a strange form of English, peppered with archaic terms, some of which hadn't been used in common speech for over 500 years. She'd written it off at the time as a fluke, but now she wasn't so sure. Enfield revisited her notes and audio recordings. One word stood out: turl. It meant to twist, a term last documented in Middle English before the Tudor period. She had also recorded phrases that resembled Old Scots and Norse syntax. not dialect drift, not hillbilly slang, something older, something inherited. And the most bizarre part? The family she studied said the words came from their grandmother's grandmother, taught in secret, never spoken in public, passed down like a spell. At the same time, another clue emerged, this time from the field of forensic osteology. A quiet study published by a researcher in Missouri detailed a pattern of skeletal anomalies found in a cluster of Appalachian remains from the 11th century. These individuals shared unusual features: elongated skull vaults, fused mandibular sutures, and unusually high nasal apertures. These traits didn't align with Native American ancestry, nor African, nor East Asian. The closest match, according to comparative databases, early medieval Northern Europeans. And yet, these bones were found in a region that, by all known accounts, no European had ever entered until 500 years later. As more pieces began to surface, a new hypothesis began to form, one too controversial for mainstream academia: that a lost group of medieval Europeans, perhaps Scandinavian or Celtic, had made it to the American interior centuries before Columbus. Not just as explorers, but settlers, survivors, a population that traveled not to conquer, but to vanish. But how? How would a small group cross the Atlantic in the early Middle Ages and survive long enough to establish generations of isolated descendants? The answer may lie in a forgotten saga. In the Norse Vinland sagas, written in the 13th century from oral traditions centuries older, there are cryptic references to voyages far beyond Greenland. One story speaks of a crew that sailed west, was attacked by native peoples, and fled inland through woodlands with high cliffs and cold fogs. These details don't match Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, where Viking sites have been confirmed, but they eerily resemble the Appalachian Plateau. Could survivors of such an expedition have traveled south along rivers and mountain valleys, eventually settling in an isolated hollow where they lived and died in total anonymity? Some skeptics say it's impossible, but a few surprising pieces of material evidence suggest otherwise. In 1977, a farmer in Clay County, West Virginia, unearthed a small stone tablet while clearing a field. It was inscribed with unfamiliar symbols. At first assumed to be native, it was later analyzed and found to contain runic elements, possibly early Norse, but corrupted by time or isolation. A similar stone was discovered in the 1930s in Georgia, dismissed as a hoax for decades, until modern dating techniques showed the weathering to be authentic. Both stones are now housed in obscure local museums, rarely studied, rarely acknowledged. More recent efforts to analyze burial sites in western North Carolina, led by independent teams, have uncovered beads made of Baltic amber. Amber is not native to the Americas. It doesn't occur naturally anywhere near the Appalachian region. The only plausible explanation is contact or migration from Europe. But perhaps the most mysterious discovery came in 2021 when a metal detector hobbyist near Pine Mountain, Kentucky, found what he thought was a coin. It was flattened and corroded, but bore a strange pattern, a cross within a circle, surrounded by what appeared to be Latin letters. After chemical analysis, the item was found to be an alloy consistent with 11th century European metallurgy. The style of the cross matched early Norman Christian symbols. But no one could explain how it had ended up deep in the forest, buried beneath centuries of soil, miles from the nearest colonial era route. Why aren't these findings making headlines? Some say it's because they challenge the foundational myths of American history, the idea that the New World was discovered by Columbus and then by the English. The possibility that others came before, and not just came, but stayed, destabilizes that narrative. Others suggest the archaeological establishment simply isn't equipped to deal with radical anomalies. Grant money is conservative. Journals are slow, and academic reputations are fragile, it's safer not to look. But not everyone agrees. A growing movement of citizen historians and amateur researchers has taken to forums, podcasts, and YouTube channels, sharing maps, photographs, and even first-hand accounts. Some claim their families passed down stories of the old ones, not native spirits, but pale strangers who lived in the hills long before America was born. Others report finding strange tools, bones, or ruins while hiking, always quickly seized by local authorities, never seen again. There are even rumors of a sealed chamber in Tennessee, deep inside a state park, where excavators once found European-style artifacts and were immediately shut down by federal agents. Whether those stories are true or folklore is impossible to verify. But the pattern is clear. Someone, somewhere, doesn't want these stories told. And yet, the land remembers. The caves still exist. The bones are still buried. And the DNA, buried deep inside thousands of forgotten graves across Appalachia, continues to whisper a story that's never been allowed to speak. It's a story of survival, of loss, of memory turned myth. A story carved into rock and bone. One that asks us not just to rethink the past, but to question why some histories are remembered while others are deliberately erased. The Appalachian Mountains may seem quiet, but beneath the silence, something ancient stirs, waiting to be found. If these bones could speak, what would they say? Would they whisper truths we've long buried beneath layers of official history? Or would they scream for the centuries they've spent ignored, dismissed, or denied? The story of the Appalachian skeletons isn't just about DNA. It's about the cracks in our national memory, about how entire bloodlines can vanish from the record, yet still leave their imprint on the land and on us. So the next time you find yourself walking a forest trail in the shadow of the Blue Ridge or sleeping under the stars of the ancient Appalachians, ask yourself, who was here before us? And why were they forgotten? If this side of history resonates with you, the unsolved, the uncomfortable, the buried, subscribe. Because we're not done digging. In fact, we've only just begun. Thanks for watching. And remember, not every secret stays buried forever.